This is 7th Generation Warfare, and I'm your current host, John Nelson. In this episode, we'll begin looking at Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication number 1, Warfighting, or MCDP 1. This is the premier document that teaches Marines how to conduct warfare. As it is doctrine, it's more about how to think rather than what to think. So as I go through it, you'll see it's kind of vague. It does not go into very specific tactics, but it's more about how to frame your mind to look at the battlefield and how to shape your actions thereon. So we will go slow for this. This will be many videos. In this one, we will be looking at Chapter 1, the nature of war, and we will be looking at the subsection of defining war. So we'll get into it. To understand the Marine Corps' philosophy on warfighting, we first need an appreciation for the nature of war itself, its morale, mental, and physical characteristics and demands. A common view of war among Marines is necessary base for development of a cohesive doctrine because our approach to the conduct of war derives from our understanding of the nature of war. So this is the purpose of this book, is so that all Marines can look at war the same way, and if they're looking at the war the same way, then they can build everything else that they do off of that common framework. So that's also what I'm hoping to do with 7th Generation Warfare, is build a basis for which we can look at providing what our descendants need in order to secure their will. And so let's continue. War defined. War is a violent clash of interests between or among organized groups characterized by the use of military force. These groups have traditionally been established nation-states, but they may also include any non-state group such as international coalition or a faction within or outside of an existing state, with its own political interests and the ability to generate organized violence on a scale sufficient to have significant political consequences. So I should preface by saying Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1 is part of what would be known as 3rd Generation Warfare or Maneuver Warfare. And for more on this, you can go back to what is 7th Generation Warfare. But since the generations of warfare have been coined, there came to be a 5th Generation Warfare, which isn't accepted by all, but is the first form of nonviolent warfare, and that's where I'm running with that concept for 7th Generation Warfare. Really, war in the traditional sense is violent. 7th Generation Warfare is nonviolent. We certainly hope it not to be. So when he talks about war being a violent clash of interests, we're hoping to avoid that with 7th Generation Warfare. So I would say that 7th Generation Warfare, war is the clash of interests of individuals. Or that would really be 6th Generation Warfare. 7th Generation Warfare is the clash of your child's yet undeveloped will or ability to protect their will with influences that might hinder their will. Back to the book. The essence of war is a violent struggle between two hostile, independent, and irreconcilable wills, each trying to impose itself on the other. War is fundamentally an interactive social process. Clausewitz called it Zweikampf, literally a quote, two struggle, and suggested the image of a pair of wrestlers locked in a hold, each exerting force and counterforce to try and throw the other. War is thus a process of continuous and mutual adaptation, of give and take, move and countermove. It is critical to keep in mind that the enemy is not an inanimate object to be acted upon, but an independent and animate force with its own objectives and plans. While we try to impose our will on the enemy, he resists us and seeks to impose his own will on us. Appreciating this dynamic interplay between opposing human wills is essential for understanding the fundamental nature of war. So, irreconcilable wills. And in 6th and 7th generation warfare, in 6th generation warfare, it's not necessarily even the will of another person. It could be your own vices or the own programming that may have derived from somebody else, but it's just a phantom or a ghost in your brain that is telling you to do things, that is prohibiting you from securing your will. It doesn't necessarily have to be another person, but for the traditional warfare, such as 3rd generation warfare, that image of the wrestlers locked in that hold is a very good image. But the same could be true for somebody who might be struggling with addiction or something. There's this struggle going on inside them. They might know that the behavior is wrong, but the behavior still is pushing back and getting them to do it, even though that they don't want to. And so this is why fighting that 6th generation warfare is so important before fighting a 7th generation warfare, because you'll come to appreciate all these different dynamics that are detracting you from your will, and you'll be better equipped to help your child navigate around them when they don't know. Life is basically, to use a military weaponry term, it's like being in a minefield. You don't want to just send your kid out into a minefield. You want to help them navigate through it. There are going to be mines, and they might trigger some of them. Hopefully they don't get hurt, so. Back to the book. The objective of war is to impose our will on our enemy. The means to do this end is the organized application of threat of violence by military force. The target of that violence may be limited to hostile combatant forces, or it may extend to the enemy's population at large. War may range from intense clashes between large military forces, sometimes backed by an official declaration of war, to subtler, unconventional hostilities that have barely reached the threshold of violence. And certainly, as you go into 4th generation warfare and then 5th generation warfare, 4th being that asymmetrical warfare with non-state actors, and then 5th generation warfare being more that propaganda, the subtler, unconventional hostilities that barely reach the threshold of violence come more into play. That's the propaganda and public relations, and it could be, even in World War II, the psychological warfare or even in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was psychological warfare of dropping pamphlets that had whatever messaging on them on the general population to get inside the population's head, right? So there's many aspects to war, and ultimately it comes down to the will of the people fighting it, or the will of the population supporting the people fighting it. And if you can break that will, then you win. So it's not necessarily about violence, but it's about breaking the will. Total war and perfect peace rarely exist in practice. Instead, they are extremes between which exists in relation among most political groups. This range includes routine economic competition, more or less permanent political or ideological tension, and occasional crisis among groups. The decision to resort to the use of military force of some kind may arise at any point within these extremes, even during periods of relative peace. On the other end of the spectrum, military force may be used simply to maintain or restore order in civil disturbances or disaster relief operations. At the other extreme, force may be used to completely overturn the existing order within a society or between two or more societies. Some cultures consider it a moral imperative to go to war only as a last resort when all other peaceful means to settle disagreement have failed. Others have no such hesitancy, the United States, to resort to military force to achieve their aims. So I like how that section starts out, and it talks about how total war and perfect peace really exist in practice, and that's true. World War II is the most extreme example of total war, and for most of the people in the world, they weren't actually engaged in it. The populations of like Germany and Japan suffered greatly, in Russia and Poland and France. But it was still avoidable for most people. But on the other hand, I'd like to focus more on the peace. People think when the peace treaty is signed at the end of a war, even though wars don't tend to be declared anymore, but when the peace treaty is signed at the end of the war, that means that there's actually peace. And it's not. It's just a different form of tension that is going on. And it's a tension of wills, not necessarily irreconcilable. Not the level of tension that would make people want to potentially lose their life over whatever the clash is. And so it's really in that state of peace, and that it's in that level of tension that sixth and seventh generation warfare emerge. Because it's about acknowledging that the war continues, even though that there's not a violent war going on. There is still a war occurring. There's still forces at work trying to control your will, trying to control the will of your children. And you shouldn't let your guard down at any point. You need to take the severity, treat your everyday life, treat the protection of your will and the pursuit of your will the same you would treat an endeavor to go to war to destroy an opposing nation. And if any of you have been in the military, you know it's a full-time job. You take it very seriously. Certainly, if you're in an infantry unit, which I was not, that's your main focus is becoming very efficient killing machines. And so you should be taking that level of intent, the military level of intent of going to war, of knowing that you're in a time of war. You should be applying that to the time of quote unquote quote peace and fighting a sixth and seventh generation warfare. So that was the first section of MCDP 1 Warfighting, where we defined war, and next episode we'll be talking about friction. So I hope this is useful. Please let me know in the comments, and please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you on the next one.